Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, S-100 in Focus. This session forms part of our ongoing S-100 in Focus series, where we explore what the transition to S-100 really means in practice. It's brilliant to see so much interest from across the industry. In fact, we've received over double the registrations from our previous webinar back in May, and I think that's reflective of the growing awareness and attention on S-100 as a topic. Today, we'll be focusing specifically on how S-100 is being tested in simulated and live operational environments. And for the first time, we'll be sharing early insights from some of the trials that are currently underway. We'll also be discussing what S-100 means for you, including key timelines, industry readiness, and the potential impact on your crews. So we have lots to cover. Just to note, this webinar is designed for those with a baseline understanding of S-100. If you're brand new to the topic, we do have a range of recordings, explainers, and blogs available on our website that cover the fundamentals. So to help unpack today's topics, I'm pleased to be joined by a panel of experts. I should mention that our speaker lineup is slightly different from what was originally advertised, but our panelists here are very well placed to share their insights with you today. Firstly, we're pleased to welcome Paddy Kelly, who joins us from OSI Maritime Systems. OSI are a leading manufacturer of navigation equipment, specialising in warship ECDIS systems, and are currently partnering with the UKHO on testing S-100 with navigators. Paddy brings a wealth of navigational expertise. He has experience as a specialist navigator for the Royal Navy, as well as background in hydrographic surveying. Then, from the UKHO, we have Tom Richardson, who is Head of International Bodies and Technical Engagement. Tom works closely with the International Hydrographic Organisation and key forums across the maritime community on behalf of the UKHO, and currently chairs the IHO S-101 project team. So he's well placed to talk about the development of S-100 today. Tom also leads on international training and capacity development to help strengthen hydrographic capability worldwide. Finally, we're also joined by Matt Garland, who works within the UKHO's Technical Partnerships team. Matt works closely with the original equipment manufacturers who develop the hardware and software that displays Admiralty products, and more recently has been supporting partners with the development, testing, and trialling of S-100 enabled ECDIS. Prior to that, he has had many years' experience at the UKHO, working in cartography and technical disciplines, so has been able to bring his hands-on experience with ENC production to the transition towards S-100. Thank you for all being here. So before we get started, I'll quickly cover how this webinar will run. In the first half of the session, we'll go through some planned questions that cover the trials in a bit more detail, and unpack exactly how S-100 will support enhanced safety and precision. After that, we'll open the floor for a live audience Q&A, where our panelists will be happy to answer any questions you may have on S-100 or anything else discussed today. You can submit your questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon in the top toolbar of your screen. This will bring up a panel where you can type your question. Then, as the questions start to come in, it would be really helpful for me if you could upvote the ones you'd like to hear answered. You can do that by clicking on the arrow under each question, and that will give us a priority order when we get to the Q&A section. So let's get started. And perhaps a good place to begin would be the timelines for implementation. Earlier this year, the IMO adopted a new performance standard. And we know that S-100 data will be considered compliant once the hardware becomes available. And from 2029, all newly installed ECDIS will be required to support S-100, Tom. So what do these timelines mean in practice, and when are we likely to see S-100 data used for primary navigation?
Thanks, Guy. So as you touched on, from the 1st of January 2026, a new IMO ECDIS performance standard has been in force. So we have a reference standard in place, but at this stage, the systems still need to be developed based on the IHO standards, tested and type approved before they're ready for operational use. So currently, the manufacturers of the ECDIS systems are still developing these systems, refining them from trials, and then they'll be preparing them for further testing and type approval in due course. I think it's important to clarify that 2029 doesn't necessarily mean S-100 data will be mandated for use for primary navigation, but from 2029, new installations and retrofits need to be S-100 capable. So during this period, S57 ENCs will still be valid for use under the sort of dual fuel concept, so they can be used where S-100 data is not yet available. From the conversations we're having with the ECDIS manufacturers, we feel they're on track to deliver ahead of 2029 in some cases, but the earliest operational use would be from 2028, taking into account testing and type approval, which can take some time. We then envisage a gradual transition over several years as the industry build its readiness, covering things like training and system availability.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I mean, a really important part of that transition is testing and trialling. Matt, last year the UKHO began a programme of S100 trials with a range of partners, and these trials are testing S100 data in a simulated environment as well as live sea trials. Can you tell us more about these trials and kind of why they're so important?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Guy. So we've been testing data for S100 data for a number of years now. I believe it started in 2022, where we were testing S100 data on PPUs. And we were doing this in a partnership with the Port of London Authority. And that gave us a really good foundation to launch our S100 trial programme. And we're now working with multiple OEMs and ECDIS manufacturers. We're testing multiple S100 data sets. And we're doing this in both a live sea trial environment and also in simulation trial too. And the main objective is to test S100 data across different platforms and in different environments, and to gather practical feedback. So our main trial is one that we're working with SHOM, the French Hydrographic Office, and Maritime, the ECDIS manufacturer. And last year we carried out 2 sea trials aboard the Stena Vinga, which is a ferry operator. And we chose the route from Portsmouth to St Malo via Jersey because it added some useful complexity in what is a relatively short journey. The jurisdiction of water changes 4 times. So we go from UK to French water. And because of this, we have to make sure that our data works well together in an ECDIS system. So we're testing this extensively. The channel also is a very busy stretch of water, as we all know. And the port of St Helier in particular is a really tricky port to operate in, with strong currents and tidal constraints. So on screen now, you should be able to see the existing S57 ENC of the St Helier port, and to the right, you'll see the S100 data for comparison. I think mariners will be really assured to see that it doesn't look too dissimilar. We're not reinventing the wheel here, but there are some subtle improvements I want to just highlight. Coloured buoys, for example, have been introduced to help with clarity on the bridge. And I think you also notice the text placement. We're now able to move and orientate text so it's put in a better position. Now, in areas where it's very busy and very cluttered with text, I think this is going to be a significant improvement. But for me personally, I think where S100 really comes into its own is having the S101 ENC as its base layer. We're now able to integrate other product specifications on top. So the S102, for example, the bathymetric layer, S104 water levels, and S111 surface currents. And these can all be toggled on and off so the mariner can see this on his front of bridge. So these trials really gave us a chance to address any teething problems with the data that we've had, and we've had a few, to be fair, but it also gave us some really valuable insight into how it can aid the navigator in a live scenario. We have a really busy schedule ahead of us this year, and we're working with a number of ECDIS manufacturers such as OSI, where in fact we visited ECDIS Limited only last week and we did some really good testing. But we'll talk about that more in a moment, I believe. Next week I'm visiting C-Smart in Amsterdam. We'll be there for almost a week, and we'll be there and joined by other hydrographic offices such as the Netherlands, New Zealand and Australia. So that's going to be a really good week. We're hoping to get some really good feedback from that week. Hopefully we'll be undertaking a 3rd sea trial on the Stena Vinga, hopefully within the next couple of months. And we plan to do a sea trial with the Royal Navy on the HMS Time. So I think 2026 is shaping up to be an important year for testing.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I mean, coming to yourself, Paddy, what trials have OSI completed to date, and why is the testing phase so important for you?
Thanks, Guy. OSI Maritime Systems, we've worked on our testing in kind of two sides, really. Testing the data and making sure that it can be installed, displayed, and the interoperability works correctly. So a functionality kind of a testing regime. In order to achieve that, we've worked with 42 hydrographic offices and data producers, and we've run 32,000 data sets through our system to make sure that it's robust. But that's the functionality side. What we also focused on is how does it present to the end user? So, how is the implementation actually able to be manipulated by the person who's going to operate the systems? Because that's clearly one of the most key elements of implementing S-100. For that, we've conducted a trial with the Royal Canadian Navy in Frederick Roulette. As Matt alluded to earlier, we've conducted trials at ECDIS Limited in a simulator environment, and we're hoping to provide our ECPIN 7 version of our software, which is a warship ECDIS version of the software, to HMS Tyne, so that we can conduct trials with the Royal Navy. And this software, which we're intending to release later this year, is already quite mature, but we want to be able to optimize the end user implementation, so make sure that the end user is really satisfied with how they use the S-100 products that UKHO and the other hydrographic offices are providing. And the planned trial route, which Matt mentioned, between Portsmouth and St Malo, is a really good testing ground for us, because it allows us to allows us to give the end user the opportunity to employ the systems in pilotage waters, open waters, and in areas where the tidal range is really large and the navigation is exceptionally challenging.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Matt, you mentioned the testing you did recently with ECDIS Limited. What have been some of the key insights to emerge from those trials so far?
Yeah, Guy, it was a really worthwhile day of testing at ECDIS Limited. Having the opportunity to speak with ex-mariners, ex-navigators was really, really helpful. I think on screen now you'll be able to see a screen recording of the S57 ECDIS on your left, and on the right is an S101 example. The one on the right is loaded with S101, 102 and 104. This example is showing a vessel with a reasonably sized draft operating just north of the Isle of Wight, sailing towards Southampton. And I think it's quite obvious and quite apparent to see the extra navigable waters shown on the S100 data sets. This is also a really good example of the coloured buoys too. You'll easily notice the lateral, cardinal and special mark buoys just popping out from the screen. So I think on this particular example, I'm actually piloting this vessel. You can see I have the confidence to manoeuvre way off course, not on purpose, I assure you. But I know exactly where my go and no-go areas are when navigating with the S100 data sets.
Yeah, okay. Thanks. I mean, and from your perspective, Paddy?
Yeah, as Matt mentioned, I mean, he was driving the vessel in the simulators at ECDIS Limited, which was interesting, but I think the combination of S104, the height of tidal adjustment that we're able to apply, shows in the slides as being really valuable. Introducing tidal data to that bathymetric surface, the S102 data below, allows the safety contour to expand and contract in real time, showing the mariner with real clarity in real time where they can and can't navigate their vessel, and giving them freedom of manoeuvre. And that's, as we saw at ECDIS Limited, likely to be particularly helpful for large vessels and vessels with minimal underkeel clearance, navigating in the vicinity of ports or in busy port approaches. And hopefully they can also see on the slides that we were able to test the surface currents layer, S111 surface current overlay. In particular with S111, that it means the mariner no longer has to rely on a separate standalone tidal stream atlas, penciling in the times and translating the positions into their chart system. They've got it all overlaid in that one system, adding greatly to their situation awareness and hopefully navigational safety and efficiency too.
Yeah, okay, thanks. At our last panel discussion, we heard from Johan, the master of the Stena Vinga, and he described some of those navigational challenges, Matt, and as you've alluded to, operating within a tight tidal window with just a metre of underkeel clearance. So from those trials so far, what feedback have you received on how S100 can address the those real world challenges?
Yeah, so at ECDIS Limited, we received some really interesting feedback from them. These are experienced mariners and trainers. And first impressions from them is that they are really excited by the S-102 and S-104 combining to give a really good water level adjustment tool feature. And to be honest, it's something that I'm quite excited about too. The feedback that we're hearing to this additionally is that data will be particularly useful when coming into a berth where precise underkill clearance is vital. So during our trials on the Stena Vinga, this benefit really came to life. And there's a video, I believe, being shown now. This is a video that I captured myself, and it shows the captain having to operate a 130-metre vessel into what is only 160 metres of availability of space. So only 15 metres at the bow and stern to actually make that tight manoeuvre. Also then you had the added complexity on top of that, where the captain said that potentially the surface currents can change 2 to 3 times during his approach. So I believe incorporating tidal data into an E&C is going to be a game changer. This is exactly the type of scenario where S-100 data sets combining 101, 102 and 104 together is really going to help with those safety critical manoeuvres. I think even more useful to navigators unfamiliar to the area too will be really beneficial to them. You can also start to see some of the commercial benefits too, certainly when it comes to efficiencies. If a mariner is able to more accurately determine safe water available, and in some cases they can both plan and execute more efficient routes.
And Paddy, what about the defence user's perspective on that?
Well, in terms of the military customer, clearly many of the benefits that are afforded to the commercial customer translate directly to the defence user. Ultimately, navigation is navigation, so whether you're taking a commercial vessel or a warship into a port or a harbour, those navigational benefits still apply. However, the new data sets that both in phase 1 in route planning and phase 2 route monitoring add additional capabilities across defence. So for example, S-102 bathymetric surface and S-104, that tidal adjustment, have wider applications in terms of autonomous vessel navigation, as well as bathymetric navigation using the depths to position and navigate your vessel. And there are also applications in mine warfare and amphibious operations, so there are significant advantages to the military users. Additionally, we also see a real benefit in providing S-100 products. Again, in particular, that S-102 and S-104 combination with the moving safety contours for our military small craft customers who often navigate with very minimal underkill clearance and over drying heights. And so being able to see where they can and can't navigate in real time is really important to them. And that's going to come with significant benefits to defence users of small craft. And finally, I think I'd add that the work that we've got ongoing with the UKHO and other hydrographic offices to develop our display and use of military applications for S-100 standards, i.e. the forthcoming S-500 additional military layers, which are going to exploit those S-100 capabilities for military use, are going to bring some really large operational advantages for the defence applications that we deal with.
Yeah, thanks. Clearly highly valuable. Moving on to the topic of data, Tom, S-100 enabled ECDIS is only as good as the data that it's displaying. But how is data production progressing, and how important is the quality of the underlying data in terms of realising the full benefits of S-100?
Okay, so within UKHO, we're starting to develop our production capability, train our staff, and as I mentioned earlier about those timeframes, we plan to develop production plans so that when the systems become available, we are producing data. But obviously for the trials, we've been producing data already, and we've been taking learnings from that to improve our processes and to feed back to the standards to improve those as well. But as you highlight, and as we have with paper and ENC previously, the products are only as good as the data going into them. It needs to be high quality, and for the S-102 bathymetry, that means multi-beam survey data often, and needs to be up to date and possibly refreshed where the seabed is changing to produce these products. Most of the large ports in the UK and some of the ports we've been working with are already collecting this information, and our previous trials across the UK and Ireland have included the Port of London Authority and Milford Haven, and Matt touched on some of that earlier. So we've been working closely with them. We find that in the port areas and in key coastal areas there's going to be benefit, but in most deeper offshore waters the S-102, for example, won't be so valuable. But coming back to your question, yes, it's really key that the quality of the data is there. So there's complete coverage. And through the trials we've been doing recently, we found some gaps in areas where you would expect the surveys to be of a high quality. For various reasons, we've found some small gaps, and we've worked with the ports to fill those and improve the data. So that collaboration with the ports is key to that too, getting the good quality and up-to-date data to produce S-100 products.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it sounds like there's some good foundations in place, but ultimately, continued collaboration is the key. One question we always receive is around training. So, Paddy, based on what you've seen so far, what level of training and familiarisation will realistically mariners need?
Yeah, that is a good question, one that tends to come up routinely on almost every visit I do. I think there are two key elements to the training question. Firstly, I think a short product familiarisation is strongly recommended, so that the people who are going to be using and employing the S-100 data and the systems on which they run understand the products that are available, how they're going to obtain them, and how they're going to exploit them and use them from a navigation perspective. And then the second element of that will be familiarising themselves with the ECDIS implementation, or warship ECDIS implementation in the case of OSI Maritime Systems, of course. So how does the end user actually use those products in order to navigate safely, or in the case of a defence user, gain their operational advantage? For example, a user of our warship ECDIS systems, having talked to a lot of end users, the feedback we get is that we think about an hour of familiarisation is probably all that's needed. And some of that stems from the familiarity of the products. So the S-101 product is deliberately very similar to an S-57 product. And so that should provide some reassurance to the people on the call that the training burden isn't going to be enormous. But getting ahead of that training and familiarity for the policymakers is going to be key, I think.
It's really positive to hear that from Paddy, because in the S-101 project team within IHO, we've intentionally sought to keep the symbology and the presentation consistent with S-57 where we can, and add those improvements. So it's good to hear that the training will not be significant. What we do see is possibly a greater need is when we bring in the other products. So with S-102 and S-104, users will need to familiarise themselves with the safety settings, and based on our experience with S-57 ECDIS, it's important that this is in place. Currently, within the International Maritime Organisation, there's work underway to revise seafarer training standards, and part of that will be the revision of the ECDIS model course 127, which is in progress. So we see changes to those courses then filtering down to the training establishments, and they're already preparing courses and involved in the trials, which is great to see.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, as a final conversation point, before we move on to the audience Q&A, coming to yourself first, Paddy, what's the one thing people watching this webinar need to do to prepare for the transition?
I think it goes into my previous answer, really. I think understanding what products will be available, considering both when and how they're going to be used on board. And I think early exposure to the S-100 product line is going to be really key to attaining that level of understanding. Getting ahead on the what, when and how of S-100 will allow them to develop the safety management systems and the system operating procedures needed to exploit the capabilities and the many capabilities that will be available from the outset.
Yeah, thanks. And Tom?
From a data supplier perspective, we'll be making our trial data available. So building on what Paddy said, there is the opportunity to get that data. There's also going to be software to allow you to view that data that will become available, and that will be on our website soon. And that's part of the IHO's International Testbed Programme, where encouragement is to share data and tools.
Yeah, great. And Matt?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to echo a couple of Paddy's points, to be honest with you. So getting ahead of the curve is likely to put you in a much better position, and that's something that we recommend you doing. So we do have a range of Admiralty resources available on our website. So some of these webinars that's been pre-recorded before, and some of our other seminars. So I'd recommend beginning with those. I'd also recommend having early conversations with your OEMs, your ECDIS manufacturers, your Admiralty distributors, and of course your training centres of choice.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I mean, understanding the understanding the requirements and use cases, making use of data available, and starting conversations early is probably the summary of those points. So yeah, I mean, now we'll move into the Q&A, where we'll address as many of your questions as we can. If you haven't already, please submit your questions using the Q&A function. And as a reminder, you can do so by clicking on the Q&A icon in the top toolbar of your screen. And we'll do our best to cover a broad range of topics. And where we can't answer everything today, we'll capture themes for future sessions in the series. So with that, let's move on to our first question. Okay, excellent. So we've had lots of questions coming in, which is absolutely fantastic. And thank you very much for taking the time to upvote the questions. So we're going to start with, I'll read the questions out, and then we'll come to the panel members. So the first question is, realistically, the majority of the SOLAS fleet won't voluntarily pay for new S-100 capable ECDIS just because they're available. There are also questions around the cost of S-100 data. You referenced several years earlier around dual fueling for S-57 and S-100 beyond 2029 to allow for the equipment transfer. But the question here is there an expected date for S-100 to be used for primary navigation? You know, i.e., is there a cutoff for S-57? I think maybe we'll come to you, Tom, for that one.
Thanks, guys. It was a great question. And currently, there isn't a set date. We've talked about the sort of sunset of S-57, and that will be a need for a date in future, but nothing's fixed as yet. We understand it will be a significant period because of the time it takes vessels to upgrade their equipment, and as the question states. Something we do see potentially is that other developments, such as new regulations around cybersecurity, changes to requirements for receiving navigational warnings, for example, could come in and push things and drive those changes in future. But there isn't a fixed date at this stage, and it's something, as we get towards 2029, the community will need to work on. Clearly, the data producers will want to limit the dual fuel period, but we have to take into account the time it takes to upgrade vessels.
Okay, thank you. Really good question. So the next question is around the trials, Matt. So also touched on OEM, so I'll probably come to you first, Matt, and then Paddy. Has there been any negative feedback to come from these sea trials, and how does the UKHO and associated OEMs plan to mitigate it? I think, you know, while you're thinking of the answer, it's probably worth pointing out that I think there has to be an expectation for things not to work in a trial. That's the very purpose of learning. So probably a trial without any negative feedback, if you like, is probably one with limited learning. So what do you think?
I think you hit the nail on the head there. We haven't had negative feedback. We've had some constructive feedback, is how I would put it. Of course, when we went on our first sea trial, perhaps naively from my point of view, I thought everything would work really well. However, when you start testing and trialing S-100 data in new S-100 systems, in real-life scenarios, things do go wrong, and that's obvious. At the moment, we're collating back all the feedback that we've received from the first 2 live sea trials, and we'll be sharing that in due course. But yeah, just to go back to that question, yeah, we've had some constructive feedback, absolutely. It's not been plain sailing, but we're working hard to fix those issues. And this is exactly why we're doing live sea trials now, nice and early, well before 2029 date, is to find any bugs with the data, with the system, with the kind of operations of these trials as well, and put them right. And this is why 2026 is going to be a really busy sea trial schedule for us.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Anything on that, Paddy?
Yeah, I mean, the ECPIN's development build for our software, as I mentioned, that we've been providing is relatively mature now, and it runs on the same chart engine, the same sensor interface that we've seen. So actually integrating it into the ships and the simulators has been quite straightforward. What we mainly see is the data itself, how we present it and how we deliver it to the end user. Sometimes we see where we've made changes, or where the data standards have resulted in changes to the software, where the user makes observations, where they can say, for example, you know, I like the functionality you've got there, but wouldn't it be great if it also did X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
Or, for example, I can adjust the number of tidal stream arrows that we see when we load surface current, so the screen is and the display is less cluttered for navigation. And that's exactly the kind of feedback that we hope to get during the trials, because it means that as an OEM, we can change the implementation to make sure that when we do release the software later this year, that the end user really likes the implementation. But we also work really, really closely with the S-100 working groups and panels that we're fortunate enough to sit on. So we can also influence the standards and hopefully shape the products more broadly rather than just within our system as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. The next question, they're coming thick and fast, so I'm just going to keep firing the questions at you, but I think I'll come maybe to you, Tom, for an initial clarification on a point in here first. The question is, we know that the manufacturers are still working on S-100 capable ECDIS systems, but when does the UKHO expect or aim to start distribution of S-100 layers commercially, further than S-101 and including S-98? So I think I'll come to you for the commercial part of the question, Matt, but do you just want to clarify around S-98, Tom? Because
Yeah, S-98 is a really important standard. It's the interoperability specification, which dictates how the different layers we've talked about work together.
Okay.
That's currently being finalised towards edition 3, and we expect that to be endorsed by a committee in May this year and then approved to allow it to be reflected in ECDIS systems. Some ECDIS systems are already reflecting the changes in it, people involved in the groups. So that, what I interpret that question to be is the full stack. So it's S101, 102, 104, possibly S111 combined. So yeah, S198 is the standard that enables that. It gives the rules to ECDIS on how they should be combined, but it's not a data product like the other data sets.
Okay, thanks. So in terms of that, in terms of the other part of the question, Matt, the commercial provision, what's the plans there?
Yeah, nothing's been set in stone just yet, Guy, but it's not so much commercial data we'll be releasing, but we will be releasing our trial data soon on our website, which we did touch on earlier. With regards to when we'll start releasing stacks of data, as Tom just touched on there, I think talking to original equipment manufacturers and ECDIS manufacturers, such as Paddy at OSI and others, we're expected to see an improved ECDIS system in the market around 2028. So I think we would kind of tie up our timelines very similar to that, and we'll be looking to produce data on a commercial sense around similar times, would be my thoughts at the moment. But as I said, nothing totally set in stone yet.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's the important point made earlier around the collaboration between the data producers, data suppliers and OEMs to make sure that the customer requirements are met and there's an alignment there.
I'll just briefly add, if it's okay, Guy, a point about quality. So it's important when the data does go out, it's at the right quality levels. So some of the standards in development are the validation checks. So the checks that we apply to the data to make sure it's all consistent and meets the quality standards as we touched on earlier. But some of those aren't quite mature yet. So during 2027, we expect more operational versions of those, which I think links in with the point Matt makes around when the data is going to become more widely available.
Could I just say as well, we're looking at areas where we're going to start releasing the data. We're looking at ports in particular because we see the importance of offering stacked data sets. So we're looking at potentially top 10 ports that we're going to start offering the S100 data for. But exactly when that will be, I can't possibly say just yet. But it's something that we are having internal discussions about.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, thanks again for the really good questions that are coming in. So the next one is, I think maybe I'll come to you, Paddy, on this one. What prevents the use of S102, 104 and S111 together with S57?
That's again, a really good question, and one that until I think you've seen the systems and seen them running isn't something that's going to be that clear until you get hands-on. Technically, you could take an S102 bathymetric surface and put it on top of an S57 chart, and technically you could take an S111 surface currents and put it on top of an S57 chart. But I certainly wouldn't encourage it, and I probably look to the other panel members, and they're probably, hopefully they're nodding with me on that. Yep. And I wouldn't recommend it, especially for S102, the bathymetric surface, because if you think about a bathymetric surface as being something that you might have been familiar with from a multi-beam kind of data set, when you overlay that on an S57 chart, what you're effectively doing is putting a chart on top of a chart on your table, i.e. you can't see through it, so you will only see the bathymetric surface and not any of the chart data below. As Tom mentioned earlier, the key advantage from the S-100 standard is the S-98 interoperability, which will allow you to put S-102 on top of an S-101 chart and actually select an interoperability setting which allows the ECDIS system of choice to display the most optimal product from each layer. So for example, you might have the S-101 buoys on the surface, but you would also see the bathymetric surface around it, but that bathymetric surface wouldn't overlay the jetties and other physical constructs. That interleaving of data is exclusive to S-100 and afforded by that S-98 interoperability standard. So whilst technically some of it's possible, you'd really struggle to navigate on it or potentially even operate safely with some of the layers, and you certainly wouldn't get the advantages that are afforded by those interoperability standards, which, as Tom said, are really key to the process.
Yeah, I think that's... Yeah, go on, Tom.
Just to follow that briefly, right at the start we talked about the IMO ECDIS performance standard, and that sets out these requirements and introduces this. Currently, the S52 presentation standard specifically prohibits changing sounding values. So even though you could do this technically, it wouldn't be a tested thing that's gone through type approval that's got that additional assurance. And I think some of our lessons from ECDIS and S57 ENCs back in the early days shows us that having those checks in place, the testing that's done to do type approval is important for assuring these systems to be compliant. So you could do it, but it wouldn't necessarily be a compliant solution that would give that assurance.
I think I'd add one more point, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
With the bathymetric surface, when you overlay it, if we select feature hybridization, that means that not only does it interleave the products in a natural manner, it means that you can also use features such as your safety contour from the best product available. So with an S102 bathymetric surface on top of an S101 chart, as we saw in the videos earlier, that means your safety contour can be selected from the bathymetric surface, which means your safety contour is no longer linked to the charted depth contours from your S57 product, but it means your safety contour can have any value as per the bathymetric surface, which is a real advantage, whether you're using it with S104 height of tide adjustment, so it can change in real time or on your time-dependent settings, or if you're just using S102 and you want to set a particular depth safety contour value, you're no longer limited to relying on what has been included in the S57 chart. So it's a real advantage from those S98 interoperability settings.
Thanks. That was a really good question and a really thorough answer. So the next question is, what happens if the seabed is particularly changeable? Will that be shown? And what happens if tidal data drops out in real time? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, if the seabed is changeable, the 102 data bathymetric surfaces might need to be updated more frequently, because there's a risk that if it's very changeable with sound waves and things, it may not represent the seabed. So there may be some areas because of that changeability, but it's not possible to produce the data to the higher resolutions because the update frequency is a challenge. One of the things we have done in S101 is added in, so people will probably be familiar with CATSOC, for the ratings, for the data quality. We've added in some additional attributes to allow this to be captured. So you can indicate a temporal variation. This won't be present straight off, but it will allow hydrographic offices to indicate where things are changeable in a much better way than they can now. So yeah, it's a challenge, but we've done some things to kind of allow that to be communicated.
Okay.
Sorry, I think on that as well, if I may, is that because there was a second part about tidal stream data.
Also, what happens if tidal data drops out in real time?
So I don't know if that's tidal data in terms of height of tide or tidal streams. We can certainly speak to both, but these products are going to be loaded like a chart product. So just as you wouldn't expect your ECDIS to just disregard a chart and stop showing it, that's the same premise for the heights of tide and also for the tidal stream data. And for the tidal stream data, were your charts to drop out, which hopefully, as an OEM from all the trials we've done, wouldn't be the case. But certainly for our systems, we're still intending to fully interface with Admiralty total tide products. So even if you did, for some reason, lose your S111 surface current product, you would still have access to fully integrated Admiralty total tide. So you're certainly no worse off than we ever were before, but hopefully our trials will prevent that from happening.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think there may be
go
some
on,
confusion. I think they're thinking that S-100 is being delivered live in real time, and if that drops out, then there may be an issue, but it's not. As Paddy said, it's a data layer that's a forecast data layer, so you can view what the water level adjustment tool is doing to that time, so you can fast forward, but the data's already preloaded, so as Paddy alluded to, it shouldn't just drop out like you wouldn't expect from your E&C.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So question for you, Tom, around data validation. Who will be validating the data and be taking responsibility for the reliability of this data?
That's a good question. Also, building on what we do now with ENCs, the Hydrographic Offices as a producer of those data sets will be producing those and may use the producer codes which indicate which the official ENCs are, and that has a certain presentation in ECDIS as well currently. And where a Hydrographic Office is producing S101, if they're producing 101 in that area, the S102 data and S104 need to be consistent with that. So the same producer should be producing those products if they are to be integrated. If they weren't, there could be inconsistencies, or they could, for example, be on different vertical datums, which would be a bad outcome for those adjustments and would compromise safety. So for those products, it's generally still the Hydrographic Office, but there could be other organisations like ports providing the data sets into them that they validate and then they put their producer code on. And ports could be producing these for local use, but they may not have an official producer code under the UKHO producer code system. In terms of the other products, it is slightly more complicated, especially when we get into things like navigational warnings, because they'd be issued by different Coast Guards or nav area coordinators. So that's one of the things. We might see some different producer codes based on those organisations, and some of that is still taking shape, I think. And again, the trials will probably explore this.
Okay, thanks. So the next question is around hydrographic offices worldwide. So how many hydrographic offices worldwide are creating S-100 data sets to replace S-57? If some hydrographic offices do not produce S-101 and instead provide to the UKHO S-57, will the UKHO restructure them into S-101 once S-57 is obsolete? I think I'm coming back to you for that one, Tom.
Yeah, get some good questions here. But no, I can respond on that one. So in terms of actually converting the data, because of the responsibility and reliability we touched on in the previous question, UKHO wouldn't be doing that. It wouldn't be converting countries' data. And one of the reasons it wouldn't do that is that in S100, we use digital signatures. So a digital signature ensures that the data has come from that producer. Yep. They take responsibility and reliability and all that's associated with that for the data. So the UKHO wouldn't be doing that. We may, through other routes, provide training and support and assistance. And there's various routes where people can have that and receive that training. So I think there will be support, and there's the whole IHO community, capacity development and programs that allow producers to get that support, that training, and they gradually will come along. As we've seen with S57 and people moving from paper charts to S57 ENC production, there will be a sort of community effort to move things. But it will take time, it's true.
Yeah.
Just
go on,
to really quickly add, HOs vary in size and shape across the world, so it's really difficult to answer in a snapshot. We have capacity building programs where we try to help, perhaps the smaller HOs with a transition from S57 to S101, so we'll help where we can. But in terms of changing what we would do, that's not really up to us. We will just be, offering our S100 data sets as and when we're ready to offer them. So I said it won't just be ourselves assisting, perhaps the ranks will also help the other HOs perhaps struggling to make that transition into the S100 world.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. We touched on this one earlier, but I'll just make sure that it's been covered off. How does the tidal data feed get it onto the ECDIS? Is it part of the total tide license?
I can.
Yeah, you touched on that, Paddy. Do you want
I touched on it earlier. So it's entirely separate to Admiralty Total Tide. The S104 will be delivered as a chart product. I know we've talked about different time scales for the product. I think the files that I've certainly seen and received are around 5 days at the moment, but I know that's still under discussion.
That's incorporated for forecast data, yeah.
So around 5 days worth of tidal data to the end user will appear as a chart file which they load into the system. So rather than being a piece of software like Total Tide running in the background, it will be installed into your ECDIS system as a chart and loaded for display like a chart. Maybe it's a good time to talk about the weather adjustments and meteorological adjustments. Is that a good time to?
Well, yeah, I can touch on that. So with the sea trials, we're testing 4 different types of data models. So for the Solent area, we're using a private company using their data model, which is Titec. Then in the kind of open channel waters, in the open waters, we're using kind of astronomical data, which we can provide, I think it's 12 months worth of data at a time. And then internally, my colleague Tom Cropper is creating a kind of hybrid data model, and that's incorporating astronomical with weather. And that's that 5-day forecasting data sets we've provided to yourselves. So we're looking at all of them throughout the trials and doing some comparisons and seeing which works best and where.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I think it's quite exciting for the mariner as well, though, in the respect that whilst downloading a file every 5 days may seem onerous, to be able to have those meteorological corrections embedded in the tidal data can add real value to the mariner, rather than having just a static prediction model. It means the data they're going to get is going to be more precise than it's ever been. So another step forward, probably from an S-100 perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So a question, the next question is, when implementing the ECDIS mandate, the availability of S-57 data was a determining factor, and IHO was successfully pushing for sufficient coverage. Is there, or are there newer information on when S-101 coverage will be similar to the current S-57 coverage?
I mean, it's really hard to say at the moment because of where we are with the standards. The production capabilities are being built, but the pace at which all those different hydrographic offices at different stages are going to convert all their coverage, especially when it's hundreds and thousands of cells, is going to take time. But I think over the next few years, through the trials, we're going to understand that more. And as we mentioned earlier, with a sunset date for S-57, that's probably going to be needed to drive that. You know, that's going to push for some countries.
Thank you. Yeah, just, you know, I'm going through the questions as quickly as I can, but please, for those watching, just have a scan through just to make sure that the questions I'm asking are the ones that collectively everyone wants to hear answered. So the next prioritised question is, one of the primary concepts of chart navigation until now has been that the depth displayed are from the chart datum, which is usually the lowest astronomical tide. Incorporating tidal data into underkeel clearance calculations allows you to understand that safe period. But by changing this presentation to adjust with time and tide, do you feel you are sacrificing an element of safety? I think I'm going to come to you for that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's something that's come up on quite a few of our trials, and it was something that we talked about at ECDIS Limited last week when we were down there trialling the data in their simulators. I certainly don't think there's a safety sacrifice, but the implementation certainly has to be right. Mariners will obviously need to understand when they've got these data files being applied in key areas, because as you say, there's a real step change from the fact that you could look at the chart and always know that you had that minimum amount of water there, it being aligned with lowest astronomical tide, whereas now there's a height of tide adjustment on there, and so the soundings are presented in a very different way. So that very much leads into what we were saying earlier about the training requirement, the product familiarisation. What was recognised was at the boundaries of some of these products, and on the chart display, there's clear standards for showing where the boundaries of the products lie. Then clearly you can have a product that doesn't have tidal height showing, so it's referenced to lowest astronomical tide, the boundary, which is clearly annotated, and then soundings which have been reduced. And clearly that's raised a lot of discussion when we've gone out and conducted the trials, and that's something that we talked to the UKHO and the other S-100 panels we work on, as to how we can optimise the display to make sure that there is absolutely no way that it can be confused as to what the vertical datum in use is. But yeah, it's a key question, and one that's come up in trials, and one that we're feeding back in and working towards how we optimise the display of that data to make sure there is no compromise to safety.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just add a little bit?
Of course,
just my own analogy, I guess. I liken it to the safety contour. I think it's an educational piece, like you touched on, Paddy. In the S57 world, if your safety contour is 6 meters, it was set to a 10-meter contour, so you knew you had that margin to play with. Whereas in the S101 dataset world, you don't. So your safety contour is your limit. So it's just understanding kind of the margin of errors are probably removed in the S100 world. That's kind of how I understand it.
Okay, thank you. So next question is how large are the new data sets going to be? This will particularly affect vessels doing updates via internet or email downloads. Do you want to take that,
Yeah,
Matt?
I can start with that one. So for the trials we're doing on the Stena Vinga, we've created a number of data sets. And for S101 compared to S57, it's relatively the same. I think we're looking at approximately a megabyte per ENC, so no real change there. But as we touched on earlier, we're not reinventing the wheel, so we probably wouldn't expect that. With regards to, say, 102, it varies. It depends on the coverage of the 102 dataset, the resolution of the dataset. So for the Port of St. Helier, we've created 2 datasets, one at 10 meters and one at 2 meters, and there is a considerable size difference. I would say the 102 is probably the largest dataset out of the 4. 104 and 111 as well are considerably larger than the ENC2, but I just wanted to say that, I mean, it's probably only the start and the end of the journey that you're going to have these extra data sets. You're only going to be using 102, 104, and 111 from where you depart and where you arrive, because that's where you need the extra data. So I wouldn't get too bogged down that your total overall package is going to be huge in comparison to what you're using now.
Okay.
That roughly makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. So we've just got time for a couple of questions, a couple more questions. The next one is, is internet access to the bridge required to use all functions of the S-100 layers stroke data set? I'm going to come to you for that one, Paddy.
No. I'll expand on that. I'm not just going to give a no answer. So no, it isn't. And I think for those listening, some reassurances. When we trialled this, or when I prepared the laptops for seagoing trials that we've conducted, I've taken those laptops entirely offline and prepared them entirely offline. And when we've got on board the ships, we've taken a feed from their sensors so that we can show position and their key sensor inputs. But we've not had any internet connectivity on the trials that I've run, and I'm assuming that's the same for yourself.
Yes.
The products are loaded as you would load an existing S57 chart. And I know it's difficult to envisage unless you've been hands-on with the system, but loading an S101 chart or an S102 product is almost identical, at least in our system, almost identical to loading an S57 chart, a permit, an ENC cell. So no internet connectivity is required, other than unless you want to download the products when you're at sea, of course.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely right.
I think this, well, depending on the length of the answer, this might be the last question. We might get to one more, but I think it's quite a good question to end on if it's the one we do. With S-100 adding more real-time information or more up-to-date information on the ECDIS, how can bridge teams make sure they don't get overloaded with too much data and still make clear, safe decisions? Any of you can comment on that one, I don't mind.
You start, Paddy.
Yeah, we'll come
I'll
to you.
happily lead. One of the bits of feedback we've had from the trial is that, especially when we started with S111, was that the tidal stream arrows were too busy. There's just too much on there for the average mariner, and obviously we've worked to be able to thin those and make it a more visually clear display so that decision making is easier. The one thing I would say, I think this goes back to what we were saying earlier about the what, the how, and the when you're going to use it. So S111 surface currents is a really good product, but chances are the mariner isn't going to want it on the display all the time. So they can have it installed but not displayed, and then use it for planning, or when they're doing a particular passage around a headland where they know the tidal stream becomes really significant to their plan, or in the event the plan changes. And we've also worked hard on updating viewing groups and filters that can be applied. So the mariner can tailor the product, just as they've been able to do with S57 for many years, be able to tailor the layers on and off. Because one of the key elements from the trials that we've had is that mariners don't want the display to be overloaded. They don't want too much information. So by providing the opportunity to really tailor the display to what they need, rather than what is a nice to have, should hopefully allow them to cut through to the information they need to make those decisions. That's certainly on the OEM side.
Yeah, that's really fair. I think we're able to view the water level adjustment tool in a number of S100 systems now, and that's 3 product specifications through S101, 102, 104 working seamlessly together. We showed an example earlier today, and the screen didn't look cluttered, and that's 3 data sets. I understand the concern in shipping and in the maritime industry that at the moment they generally have S57, they may have AIO, maybe ADP SDK at the most on the front of bridge. And when they see the list of all these product specifications, phase 1 and 2, rolling out imminently, I understand their worry, but we've already seen the water level adjustment tool, and if S98 is working as it should, it should all work fairly seamlessly on the front of bridge.
I think that's a really key point on S98, in that even though it's a lot of product specifications, because the S98 interoperability standard brings them together to a single product, you're still only really showing a single product to the end user. And all those additional layers are no different to turning on tidal stream diamonds now using your feature sets or viewing groups or whatever the implementation is. So yeah, I think that S98 brings it all together to a fairly seamless single product.
Yeah.
Just one quick point on that. S98, importantly, still includes a sort of standard mode, S mode in ECDIS. And that, I think, was a learning from S57 ECDIS. So it's just building those learnings from current ECDIS into S100. So that standard mode will let you get back to just the base ENC display.
Yeah.
And that's clearly a key mitigation to this challenge. And I think the procedures and good practice across all vessels, such as having set display settings, as was just mentioned, will be really important. But it's important with S57, so it's kind of building on what we have now.
And finally, S101, as Matt talked about yesterday, the improvements to the display on S101 actually make it a much clearer chart to the end user. And we've had really positive feedback about S101 and how much the clarity of the display has been improved as a result of that. So the base product, I'm pretty confident from what I've seen, it's really good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
That's great. Thank you.
I can't comment on that because of my IHO role, but I didn't pay Paddy to say that. I just want to clarify.
Good work, Tom.
Yeah, so I thought that might be the question we ended on because it was a good one. They were all good, and I really appreciate all of your questions today. If we didn't manage to get to yours, I do apologise, but there were just too many. So please keep an eye on the Admiralty website, where we'll be continuing to share guidance and insight on S100 that will be driven by the types of questions that we've got today, both those that we answered and those that we didn't. We'll be running similar sessions at industry events this year, including Sea Japan, Posidonia, and SMM in Hamburg. And we'd really appreciate it if you could take just a moment to fill out a quick survey to share your thoughts on today's webinar. That really informs us what topics that you'd like to explore in the future and whether we got those topics correct today. You can access the survey by scanning the QR code on your screen now, or by clicking in the link that's just been posted in the Q&A panel. So before we wrap up, I just want to extend a huge thank you to our panel today. We really appreciate it, and I'm sure those watching do as well as you for taking the time to join us today, because it's really your participation and feedback that makes events like this possible. I hope you found today's discussions valuable as we work together towards the future of navigation. Thanks again for being part of this event.